Hi, everybody. Welcome, as usual, to Saturday morning's happy hour. Saturday morning for us, Saturday evening in various parts of the world, and maybe afternoon where you live in Europe. I'm really delighted to have Tasha here with us. I met Tasha through Marshall Goldsmith. We are both part of this kind of Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches group. And it's a bunch of really, really awesome people. And I think that most people would agree that out of all those awesome people, if you had to name the single most awesome person, it would obviously be me. I'm just kidding.
I mean, that's just a fact.
No, it would be Tasha. It would be Tasha. And seriously, I mean, when I first met you, Tasha, I was thinking that, wow, I mean, here's this lady who looks very young, and therefore I thought, okay, not with a lot of experience, right? In terms of just not having so many years,
Mm.
And then I heard like you talk, and I was like, wow, you're so articulate. I can't remember exactly what you said, but you just went up there and spoke for 5 minutes, and it was just awesome. And Alan Mulally introduced you, right? For those who don't know, Alan Mulally was the CEO for Boeing and then for Ford, and he turned Ford around. It was doing really badly, and the owner of Ford actually called him. He told us a little bit about the story. Anyway, so it was just really wonderful to hear you. And I've always wanted to bring you over to Austin to talk to my students, but you're so heavily booked that every single time you say, oh, I wish I could come. Maybe next time I'm in Austin, then we can do it. And it's never really coincided. So I'm so delighted that finally I have you here in Austin. Okay, you're on my computer screen, but
that's the pandemic way. Yeah, I'm so thrilled to be here, Raj. It's been a while, so great to connect.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to jump in, and the way that this is going to work, and we didn't really have a great chance to introduce, I didn't have a good chance to introduce you to Mel and Elle, but we'll do it live, okay? So the way it works is that this is very informal. It's happy hour, it's called. So I have my happy hour drink, okay, which is a big, tall glass of water. And we're just going to start with some questions, and Mel will jump in. And then towards the latter half, Elena, who I don't think you can see, but I'm going to pull her up in a little bit towards the latter half, and she'll field the audience questions. Okay, so here's my question to you. Okay, so you do a lot of work on self-awareness. You have a really wonderful book, best-selling book, New York Times bestseller called Insight. And by the way, I really suddenly occurred to me yesterday why you called it Insight, right? Because in sight, right? You have a sight inside, and it's about self-awareness, and it's an insightful name, so this is really awesome. So that is the origin for the book's name, right?
You gave me, again, a lot more credit than what actually happened. The funny thing about this book was, as opposed to my first book, which I had the title before I had the actual book, with Insight, the title was literally we waited until the last minute to pick the title, basically, before we were, getting everything ready with the publisher. But I didn't want to focus on self-awareness, right? Because I think there's something deeper that we achieve when we really see ourselves clearly. And the word insight communicated that so well. And it's one of those things like, how could we not have thought of that earlier, But I was really happy with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, it hits on so many of the kind of big points you're trying to make in the book. It's a really beautiful name. Okay, so you have some statistics about how self-aware people actually are, and versus how self-aware they think they are, right? So I wanted to talk a little bit about it, and the reason that's important, of course, is that self-awareness improves your leadership skills, and it helps improve your relationships, your well-being, etc., which we'll get to in a minute. But can you share with us a little bit about, especially leaders, right? How self-aware they think they are versus how self-aware they actually turn out to be.
Sure. So, in the 15 plus years that I've been an executive coach, it's been even more clear to me how important self-awareness is with everyone I work with, and we can maybe talk about some examples. But what we wanted to understand in our research team was, what is the prevalence of self-awareness? Anecdotally, I thought the world seems to be getting less and less self-aware, even though I'm working with these amazing, brilliant, successful leaders who have harnessed it. So our research with, this has been over 7+ years now, thousands of people all around the world, we've discovered that 95% of people believe that they're self-aware, but only about 10 to 15% of us actually are. And if you think about that, for the math nerds who are watching, that means that on a good day, 80% of us are lying to ourselves, about whether we're lying to ourselves. And, everybody's always like, well, what category are you in, Tasha? And I would say that when I began this project, I thought I was in that 10 to 15%. As it turns out, I had so much to learn and still have so much more to learn. So the good news is we can all improve, and we're all in this together.
Wonderful.
Can I jump in with a question?
What?
Well, I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
When you were doing this research, and hi, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for thank you for being here. So when you're doing your research to discover, I think I'm self-aware versus I really am self-aware, what were the questions? Like, what were the distinctions where you were able to parse that someone really wasn't?
So that is a really important question. And I think it starts to illuminate how you get that clarity. So the 95% statistic was literally asking people, are you self-aware on a scale of 1 to 5? 1, not at all. 5, very, very much so. But what we discovered in looking at highly self-aware people who didn't start out that way was that they basically possess 7 types of self-knowledge that the rest of us, still are working to have. And these are things like our values, knowing what we're passionate about, knowing our aspirations, what environments we fit in, what are the patterns of behavior that we have over time. And what we discovered is once you start to measure that and you get very specific, for example, for values, do you have a set of principles that guides how you live your life on a day-to-day basis? That's when people are able to get a closer, more realistic look of their own level of self-awareness. Now, that being said, think about the least self-aware people that you know. Our research shows that 99% of us work with at least one such person. Mm-hmm. Now, if you ask them to say, to fill this assessment out and say, how self-aware are you? My guess is a lot of them would have sort of falsely high scores. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's important when you're measuring self-awareness to take self ratings as well as other ratings. And so for our research, what we looked at is, these 7 pillars of insight, we call them. We had self ratings for each, and then we had someone else rate them for each. And if both were high, they were considered self-aware. So there's a lot of complexity here with measurement, but I think, Mel, to your point, when you start to get more specific, that's when there's a lot more power and understanding.
Yeah, and I like that in your research, there is no self without the other. Mm-hmm. And I think there's something really profound about that you need someone to reflect on you for you to even be, to find the whole truth. Mm-hmm. Pretty cool.
It's awesome. So Mel, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Tell me your top 3 values.
To feel safe.
Okay.
Healthy body and inner peace.
Nice. Okay. And Tasha, I don't know if you have any research on this, but let's say that my values are the same as Mel's, right? As opposed to totally different. In fact, they're, I think, different. For me, I think a sense of fun, lightheartedness, adventure are super important to me, and friendships, just shooting the breeze and things like that. Is there any research on whether complementarity is better in terms of values, or is it synergy and congruence? Do you know?
I actually don't know of any research that looks at that. It doesn't mean there isn't any, but I think that's a powerful, powerful question. Because it isn't, like a lot of things, it's the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So for me, my top 2 values are making a positive difference and perseverance. And I see an interplay, on a good day, I see an interplay between those 2 things, where the perseverance is what helps me continue to believe in what I'm doing because I want to make a positive difference. So I think, if anybody out there wants to research this topic, I think there would be so much there. That's a really great question.
Yeah, but what is your intuition about it? My intuition is that the value congruence is very, very important for people to be able to get along with each other, because, values are who we are at our core, right? And if you meet somebody with a totally different value, I imagine that there'd be more headbutting going on. But at the same time, I think that you need to have some level of, just to spice it up, some level of difference in terms of not opinions. Opinions, I think, come from values, but interests,
Yeah. And I think that's an important distinction, right? Interests versus values. Values are kind of the principles I live my life by, how I see the world. And, I think about our political discourse all around the world, but especially in the United States. it arises not usually out of a difference in value, in my opinion. It's a difference in how that value is realized, right? And so I have one of my best childhood friends, his name is Jason, and he and I have the polar opposite political beliefs.
Okay.
And about 2 years ago, we were having this big holiday celebration and we'd had some wine and we were really trying to, get at this. And what we discovered was, instead of talking about our opinions about things, if we went one level down and talked about what do we really value, there was so much in common, right? We had different opinions about how to get there, but I actually think that's a powerful type of conversation to have when we feel like our values are different. Are they really? That's another good research question.
Right. I'm sure that most Americans would agree that, what we want is America to prosper, right? People to get along with each other. Not for a lot of people to not have basic needs met. Right, just our approaches and perspectives on how to achieve those things might differ. So I do agree that I think that at the level of values, there's going to be a lot of congruity. Okay, so I'm going to jump to a slightly different question, and then Mel, feel free to kind of jump in as well. Okay, and Tasha, if at any point you feel like you really want to say something that you think is important, the audience would like to hear, please do that as well. So with the COVID-19 situation, right? Do you think that can you specify ways in which you think people who are more self-aware are likely to differ in their behaviors, in their thoughts inside their heads, versus people who are not as self-aware? Maybe we can call them self-opaque people, right? Self-aware versus self-opaque. Do you think that there's going to be a difference? And do you think that self-awareness matters, in other words, in this pandemic? And if so, how?
That's an important question. I'll preface it by saying I don't fully feel like I can answer that. We're so deeply into it, but just a couple of thoughts. One thing we know just about humans in general is, more than anything else, most of us hate being alone with our own thoughts. There was one study that was done where the researchers actually put people in an empty room and they gave them a choice. They could either sit there without their phone in total silence for 5 minutes, or they could give themselves mild electric shocks. Guess what almost everyone decided to do?
I actually happen to like mild electric shocks.
Yes, maybe they were tired and they didn't have their coffee that day or something. But I mean, that's a really astounding data point. Yeah. And for self-aware people, they're often, almost always actually more mindful, and not in a sort of overly self-analytical way, but they're able to sit with their thoughts. And I think a lot of us, including and especially type A me, have experienced some boredom. We're burnt out and yet we're totally bored at the same time. And I think for self-aware people, having that groundedness and that mindfulness, as well as being able to translate, if I liked something about the old world, what is a new world version of that? So I think that it's not just being comfortable with it, but self-aware people are able to act on insights to build, the best possible reality we can have right now.
And what does that translate into for you?
Say that one more time, Rush.
What does that translate into for you? So, how have you adapted to the changes now? So you were like on the road, right? And giving these keynote addresses and things like that. And now, that's not happening, obviously. So what? I mean, how do you handle this?
So for the first 2 months, and maybe even currently, I would say not well. It's everybody has been impacted from this. And I know that I am, one of the luckier ones, but I couldn't have ever imagined how different my life would be in June of 2020 than, January. So I travel 250,000 miles a year. In March, for example, I had 10 keynotes all around the world booked. And so it's been, I wish I could say that I immediately was able to get meaning from it. But I think so many of us, in some sense, are just in a survival mode. And for, especially the first 2 months or so, I would get up every day and say, how can I get through the day today? This is not about finding my joy. This is not about fulfilling my greatest desires and wanting to make a positive difference. It was, can I get through the day? Yeah. And what I've realized actually is there is nothing wrong with that. And this whole idea, Shakespeare wrote King Lear during the plague, when he was shut in his house for a year. That is an unhealthy amount of pressure to put on ourselves. And going back to self-awareness and sort of what we know about highly self-aware people is they're also self-compassionate. And if there was ever a time for self-compassion for all of us, I think this is that time.
Okay, so you've been very self-compassionate. And what about your life circumstances, who you live with, and so on? What role has that played? Has that been kind of overall supportive, and you're supportive as well, or did you have to work through that?
That was the luckiest part, I think, for me. I've been sequestered here in my downtown Denver loft with my husband of 10 years and our 6-pound poodle. And it's not the biggest place in the world. And, when you move to a city, you sort of make that decision. But it's been nice to be here because we've been able to see the city start coming back. And Dave and our poodle Fred and I get along really well, and it's easy. And I think that's made a big difference.
Wonderful. Mel.
Multiple things that you have said struck a chord with me. One is I appreciate your vulnerability. For me, as a coach and speaker, and specifically training people in emotional mastery, sometimes when I get sad, I feel like I can't reveal that, because there's some level of, maybe there's like a performative aspect of wanting to be the thing that I write about and that I speak about. I really value when leaders like you can share like, hey, I'm having shitty days, and that's cool. And here's the insight about why that's cool. I think it's really humanizing, and I think it gives people inroads to access themselves more, because it sort of allows imperfection. It allows it like humanizes the science.
Right.
So thank you. And then when you were talking about self-compassion, I got a little curious about that. And I'm wondering what your self-talk sounds like.
That's a good question. I think a couple of things that I've stumbled upon, ever the scientist during the pandemic, is really trying to figure out on a day-to-day basis what are sort of the micro habits that I can put into place that are going to support my mental health and well-being. So one insight that I found maybe about a month and a half ago is the following exercise. So either the night before or when you get up in the morning, ask yourself, what is the best version of today? Like what does today look like at its best, or what could it look like at its best? And, don't put in things there that are never going to happen. Like we magically find a vaccine tomorrow, or, a perfect cure. But, it's simple things. It's things like I'll get a virtual keynote lead, or somebody that I really love that I haven't spoken to in a while will call me. And I've noticed that my self-talk has gotten, like all of us, I think, like it's gotten dark lately. And I've let myself sit in that to the extent that I need to understand it's happening. But then I try, I'm not perfect by any means, it's far from it, but I try to find those little kind of shots of positivity and optimism. I'm not a big fan of optimism that isn't grounded in reality. There's a lot of people that are like, oh, we're going to create our new best world, and this is all for a reason. And I don't personally buy into that, and I think that's why I think it's good to be reasonable and realistic. And for me, that's what's allowed me to continue that optimism, is it's grounded in some sort of achievable reality.
I love that. And a variant of that is sometimes I do this, I have a few practices that I do every single day, and others that I'm trying to inculcate, and it's taking a little bit of time. But one of the practices that I want to inculcate, that I've been doing sporadically, which is kind of related to this, is as soon as you wake up in the morning, before you even get out of bed, think about 2 or 3 things that are coming up that day that you feel excited about. this is not so much kind of aspirational thinking and what would the best version look like, but things that are already there. And they may not be like big things. They could be, yeah, I'm really excited about the parfait that I'm going to have for breakfast today, for which I got the fruits yesterday. Or just sitting down with my family and playing a board game in the evening. All right. Or today I thought about the session, okay, which is actually a big thing.
That's great.
Yeah. So it just kind of, revs you up for the day a little bit, gives you a positive energy, as opposed to if you by default don't do anything, or worst case, actually think about all the chores you have to do and the obligations that you have. It kind of pulls you down. You don't even want to get out of bed, right?
Right. Exactly. And maybe, Raj, to your point, one other question I've been asking myself lately is, every day, what's one thing that is completely out of my control that I'm going to work on making peace with? And just not, butting my head against the wall about things that I can't influence, and just letting that go. I told Marshall, our mutual friend, Marshall Goldsmith, we will all be Buddhists by the end of this pandemic, I think. Just let it go.
I like that. One thing I want to add, because my answer to this question is so different than you guys, is like, I actually speak to myself, like I call myself in my mind sweetie and sweet girl and sweet one and dear. And I talk to myself like I would talk to a 3-year-old.
Oh, wow. I would do that, except that I don't think I'm sweet, so I can't do it.
That would be disingenuous. I love that, Mel.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's beautiful. So do you give yourself hugs, Mel?
Sometimes, yeah.
That's nice. It actually works better than you would think it would work. Like you kind of like put your arms around yourself, right? And give yourself a nice tight squeeze and a hug. It actually feels good. I like it.
I also do like self-massage, tapping. I've been playing with somatics a lot. For anyone watching, somatics is working through the body to move energy around. And it's a whole new field for me. I haven't really played with it. And it's really fun. There's a lot there. And I think pairing the kind of work we're talking about with when you get those insights, sometimes the insights have big energy and it's scary, or, shaking it out, or like really using your body helps move things around.
Yeah, there's this whole field called, what is it called now? The name is escaping me. It'll come to me. Embodied cognition, it's called. So basically how cognitions and feelings are just offshoots of cognitions and thoughts, how they manifest themselves in your body, and what's the interplay between them. And sometimes, so for example, if you do an act that makes you feel guilty, what the findings show is that you might go and actually clean your hands as if to kind of get rid of that guilt physically. It's just really interesting in that field. So this seems related to it. So Tasha, sometime back you were talking a little bit about, one thing that you cannot control for the day that you can make peace with. So I'm going to throw something at you in case you didn't have anything out of control going on today.
Okay, please give me something. Yeah, good.
All right. So this is actually something that you might not think is going to make you feel out of control, but it's a request. Okay. There are a lot of people here that are very interested in self-awareness, obviously. It's a self-selected group of people interested in this topic. So can you lead us through a mini exercise of self-awareness? I know I'm putting you on the spot and you get paid millions of dollars to do this. Can you do it for us for free?
Yeah, let's do one. And by the way, all the tools that I use and that I talk about at Insight are empirically based. And I think that's really important, because what we know about self-awareness, or what we discovered in our research program, is that a lot of the most common pieces of wisdom about what it takes to be self-aware are actually wrong. So one of the things we learned in our program, I know, right? It's like pretty crazy. So one of the things we learned in our program was that sometimes we can overthink ourselves, right? We can get into, trying to access kind of unconscious things that are just not accessible to humans. It's how we're wired. Or we get into this kind of ruminative spiral where we focus on our shortcomings or our fears. And so in our highly self-aware people who didn't start out that way, we found that pretty much every single one of them had some daily practice that I named the daily check-in. So it essentially boils down to 3 questions that most of them ask, towards the end of the day. So you think about you're getting ready for bed, you're getting in bed, you're, back in the old world, you're coming home from work. And the 3 questions, maybe we could go through them. I don't know if you guys want to answer this maybe for yourself, but let's look at yesterday, because today is just beginning, at least here in Denver, it's 9:25. So the first question is, yesterday, what went well for me?
Yesterday. What happened yesterday?
Yesterday, was it 5 days ago? 6 months? I don't know. But just maybe one observation of something that went well.
I have an answer. Are we answering?
Go for it.
I have a new person on my team, and I learned from him, and it was great. And I guess I'll just keep it simple. That's
awesome. Perfect. What about you, Raj?
Yesterday was actually not such a productive day for me. So it was and I think I'm, without really wanting to at some level, I think my happiness depends a lot on my productivity, and I try to kind of sever that connection. I mean, it's important to be productive, don't get me, anyway, so let me get back to your question. Okay. So,
that's the question.
Yeah. So I did have this one meeting with my PhD student and my co-chair. He and I are advising the student, and she's great. And we had this productive meeting. I think that went well.
Fabulous. So both of those things are micro insight about what makes you happy, right? What are the things that give you energy? So that's question 1. Question 2 is, what didn't go so well today? And then along with that, question 3, which is, how can I learn or be smarter tomorrow?
Right. Good. So on an everyday basis, you're kind of trying to improve yourself in small ways, right? But if you add it together over 365 days, you're probably a totally different person at the end of it.
And that's a really important point. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think sometimes we think about self-awareness as, these earthquake moments in our lives where everything changes, or we get a lightning bolt that says, oh my gosh, how did I not see this before? Yeah. But by and large, the most common types of, self-awareness moments were small and incremental. And what I love about that is that in that insight, it becomes doable. If you think like, if I can even increase my self-awareness by 1% every week, what would that do in the long run over months and years? The sum total of that improvement is astonishing. And that's how, sort of, again, these people who didn't start out as self-aware, who became, very, very clear about who they were and what they were, how they were seen, that's how they got there.
Wonderful. So one takeaway is that, guys, if you're maintaining a journal, right, one thing that I do that I really like is to write about 3 good things that happened that day. But in addition to that, maybe answer these questions, right? What went well today? What did not go so well today? And what can I learn from it? And how can I kind of change that one aspect, right? That seems to be the gist of it. That's great. I'm going to try and do that, Tasha, okay? And I'm going to report back to you.
Please do. Please.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think we are at 10:30, and in another couple of minutes, we'll switch over to questions from the audience. Okay. And meanwhile, I have a question for you, and Mel, please feel free to jump in as well after this question. Can you tell us a story, okay, that you remember and you think is very useful to share from your interactions? You've had many interactions with top CEOs from Salesforce, obviously Alan Mulally, IBM, NBA, right? So maybe that would be a good one. I don't know, because there'd be some.
Cool.
I know. I love my job. I have the coolest job ever. Yeah. So the one caveat, Raj, is it's, especially with some of the work that I do, it's very confidential. And so typically when I tell stories, I'll say like one executive I worked with, and then you can fill in the blanks. You can sort of make up who you think that is. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, we'll take what we get.
Okay, cool. Because I want to keep working with people in the future. And if I shared all their dirty laundry, they probably wouldn't want to hire me anymore. But there was one executive that I worked with that I think sort of underscores a piece of the self-awareness discussion we haven't even gotten into yet. So I think maybe that's worth pivoting to. And when I started working with him, he was, very, very high up in a huge global organization. Had been deemed kind of a high potential. The first time I talked to him, I said, this guy's going to be the CEO someday. someday, no question. And as we went through the process, and as I did a 360, which for me and my work with executives, I usually go and speak to about 25 people that work.
Okay, so can you back up a little bit, just in case some people are not aware of what a 360 feedback is?
Sure.
Can you describe it really short?
So it's different what I do from what a lot of other coaches do, but I actually interview about 25 people that the person works with. And I say, what is this person doing well? What isn't going so well? What advice do you have for them to be more successful? I even talk to their friends and family, because one of the most common objections is, well, I'm not like that at home. And then I say, well, actually, I talked to your wife and I can tell you, and I talked to your teenage kids and I talked to your best friend.
Right.
So it sort of removes the objections, but to really get a holistic picture, not just of what that person isn't doing well, right? Because you're empowered to change if you want to, but what are their unique strengths and contributions? And for this executive in particular, he was smart as a whip. His people were fiercely loyal, the folks that worked directly under him. But by and large, there was a sense that he just wasn't sort of connecting with people on any more than a kind of transactional level. And we worked together, and at first he wasn't fighting me, but he was kind of humoring me, like, okay, if you think it's important that I, spend the first 5 minutes asking people of meetings, asking how their weekend was, fine. And then over time, one of the things I do is I measure whether the stakeholders that work with that person have seen behavior change. And this was one of his goals. And we started to see some really dramatic results. And towards the end of our assignment, I asked him just kind of overall, what do you think the biggest takeaway was from the work that we've done? And he said, it's something that I never would have thought ever before we took on this work, which is that at my level, perception matters almost as much as anything else. And if you think about that, especially if you're a senior leader, people don't see you through your intentions. They see you through your actions. And no matter what story they're telling, that is a valid story that you have to really kind of open your eyes to and understand. And none of he was so phenomenal already. None of these changes were huge, but we made enough small changes that, again, that sum total effect was astonishing. And by the way, his boss recently got promoted, and he got promoted to his boss's job, and he's this close to being the CEO. So again, what I do in my work is I help highly successful people get even better. People who never settle, who are always hungry to do more. And I just love what I do.
Awesome. That's a great story. Perceptions matter. I mean, at some level, it makes me feel a little sad that people can't get to your intentions, because it seems like intentions, like values, are who you are. But at another level, it's also kind of humbling to recognize that intentions alone don't cut it, right? Isn't there a saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions? Right? So,
and I have just one other very quick story to underscore that. I'm thinking of a leader I worked with. This was probably 10 or 12 years ago now. He had horrible, crippling lower back pain. And so when he was in meetings with his team, he would be kind of, he'd squirm around in his chair, and he'd get up and he'd pace and he'd leave the room and he'd come back. And he'd never told any of his team that he was going through this sort of personal hell. They took it to mean that he wasn't engaged, that he didn't care what they were saying, that he wasn't present in the meeting. Right. And I think what happens, it's not because they didn't like him or they didn't trust him, but in the absence of information, we make up stories that are usually far more dramatic than the truth. And that's why it's just so important to understand how people are seeing our behavior, like you said, Raj, totally independent of what we're trying to do.
Okay, that's an awesome example. I really feel that I can totally relate to it, but because I myself had a bad back. Of course, I wasn't a leader in this way, but I can easily imagine how people might have thought that, because it's distracting to have the pain, right? And so people might have thought, oh, he's tuned out, he's not really interested in what I have to say, and so on. But it's really, but just expressing that, hey guys, by the way, I'm suffering through this pain. So in case I get distracted once in a while, it's because of that, not because just that one change might make a difference, right?
Exactly. And I want you to know what my intentions are. My intentions are to give you my full focus and attention. They're to care about you as a human and make sure you have what you need from me. And, even kind of going a step further, I think.
Okay, let me ask you one last, sorry, I mean, Mel, I don't know if I'm stopping you from asking you, but I'm just so excited with this topic that I have one follow-up question, which is that, what do you think of this idea of people faking it though? So for example, let's say my intentions are not really that noble. Okay, I really don't care about other people. I'm a bit of a narcissist. I'm sharp, I'm good, I do my job well, but I couldn't care, for people's actual emotions. Would you first of all, would you take up such a client? Let's say that you discovered that is true. Okay. Mm-hmm. And secondly, would you then think that those behaviors, right, just saying good morning or inquiring about people's lives strategically, not because you're really interested, but because you know that that's going to improve how they perceive you and therefore increase your chances of success, right? So if you do it that way, would you recommend that? And is there some merit to you fake it till you make it?
Gosh, there's so much to that question. Mm-hmm. Let me unravel it a little bit. I think the first observation I'd have is, at least for me, life is too short to work with people that I don't just adore and respect. And so bottom line, if somebody was really a narcissist or they were a terrible person, I would just ask myself, is this really how I want to choose to spend my, limited time I have on earth? So that would be the first thing. But I also think it's important to work with people who are all in. Mm-hmm. And when I'm actually very picky with who I work with. I turn away, more people than I accept as clients. And what I'll do kind of early on in that conversation, if somebody maybe possibly thinks I can help them, is I give them a homework assignment. And I say, here's a self-assessment. It looks at how ready you are for the coaching process. It looks at, your level of humility, how much commitment you have to go through the process, and a couple of other things. And if they don't do that homework, what it shows me is they're going through the motions. And I actually don't have any judgment at all about what that means. It doesn't mean they're a bad person. It doesn't mean they're a sociopath. It just means that they're not all in. And so from my perspective, somebody who would be humoring me, I'll try to be nice to people, but I don't really care if I'm nice to them. There's just such a disconnect there. For me, I actually don't even get paid unless my clients show measurable improvement as rated by their stakeholders. So I think there is value in anyone trying to improve their approach. But I think the coaching process specifically, it just requires focus and intention and good intention of trying to make the world better. One sort of philosophical perspective I come from is business is the greatest personal growth tool there is. It's the challenges that help it, right? I mean, it's the challenges that help us rise to the occasion. It's how do we handle, a global pandemic, and how do you lead your company through and survive and take care of your employees? And so if somebody isn't all in on that process, it's kind of like, what are we doing here?
It's good. I love that. So instead of going to the mountains and meditating, you're saying take up a role as a business person. That's going to perhaps.
I think so. So if you think about growth, it's growth in revenue, it's being sustainable, but it's also growing as a person and knowing that your growth sets off a virtuous cycle of growth in other people. If you get better, everybody around you gets better. And that's what I think the apex of what's possible in business really looks like.
Wonderful. Wow.
It makes me think about, in my business pursuits, I've walked across a lot of fires. And so I was going to say, well, Raj, if the guy in the mountains walking across fires, it could be similar, I don't know. I have a comment, which is that I'm really impressed about how thorough your 360 review is. And I'm curious, what chunk of time you spend on that portion.
Large. A large chunk of time. But I think, the data is only as good, or the process is only as good as the data. Sorry, Mel, I think I might have interrupted you.
That's okay. So are the people that you're interviewing, are they glad to do it?
Most of the time, yes. And I think what creates that is the level of communication they get from, first and foremost, the leader going through it, but then also from our team. And so they say, here's why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because I want to be a better leader for you. This is why I'm doing it now. This is what my kind of high level goals are. And I think if the leader shows that vulnerability of, this isn't like a kabuki theater performance where we all pretend to do it and nothing's really going to be different. So I think that's probably the most important. And then for me, I say, listen, I'm a psychologist by background. There is nothing more important to me, literally, than maintaining confidentiality. And so I try to build that trust up front and say, whatever you tell me, I'm going to write down, but whatever goes in that report is not going to be identifiable to you. And I think what's fun about this process is that's when they start to get some skin in the game, right? Is that, okay, well, I've given these observations about what they're doing well, what they can improve, and now I want to see it. And that's why I work with my clients at every step of the way. Immediately after the interviews are over, they communicate with people. After they create their development plan, they share it with people. Then they do, not with all 25 people, but usually a subset, regular monthly check-ins with them about, as you know, my development goal is this. How did I do? What can I do next month? And so it's kind of a way to rope people in. I think, again, philosophically, we tend to look at our own development as this thing we have to do secretively and in private, but that actually goes against everything that makes humans so amazing. We survived by our virtue and our ancestors by virtue of coming together and working together. And so if we don't bring others into the process of us improving, we're not going to get the full benefit.
I love that. So Ayelet, I hope she's here. She's somebody who watches this and then makes nuggets out of this, 2-minute nuggets. And I think this last nugget was beautiful. We improve in a group with feedback and not necessarily in private. Anyway, there's one of the kind of big insights from goal achievement is that we actually are faster at achieving goals when we do it in groups. Right? For example, if you want to run a marathon, you're more likely to achieve that goal if you practice in a group and run together rather than by yourself. We're actually faster at achieving our goals in a group, which is awesome.
That's
okay,
great.
so sorry, guys. I'm going to bring up Elena just to make sure that she's with us. And I also apologize to everybody that's here that I haven't actually pointed out to where you're from and, not really kind of explicitly taking time to welcome you guys. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Okay, happy hour. And I hope you have your drink. I have mine. I haven't really taken a sip. So here goes.
Me too.
Wonderful water from the city of Boston. Okay, so Elle, you are very good at doing this, right? I mean, welcoming people. So I'm sure you've made notes on where people are from, etc. So over to you.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Tasha. Hi, you guys. Raj and Melanie. It's a very interesting talk today. Really was involved and have many questions myself and also from the audience. I want to say that we have a great community because it's wonderful to see how people are supporting each other in the comments, like they are learning from one another. And I think it's wonderful because we're using this community also as a tool to, learn from each other, not just from the speakers. But I see how Serenity and Vidya are interacting and helping each other, answering questions.
She's actually an old friend. I mean, she's not old. We go back a long ways.
So it's really great. I love this involvement in the community. That's wonderful. Okay, so we have some questions about self-awareness, of course, and I think maybe we can combine these two. So is there a downside of self-awareness? And also, so this question is just to name the person. Sorry, that's from Ankita. And also, is this process finite, or is it something like a continuous process of, this question is from Sita Maran.
Perfect. Thank you, Elena. I love those two questions together. So the first question is, actually, can you tell me the first one more time? I just want to make sure I'm. Is there a downside? Okay. So usually when people ask me that, it's because they might be defining self-awareness in a different way from the way our research team defines it. So sometimes when you hear the word self-awareness, it almost turns into like a self-consciousness, right? Where I'm over-analyzing myself or I'm overthinking what I'm doing. And that's actually, thankfully, not what self-awareness really is. Self-awareness is a clear, compassionate sense of who we are how other people see us and how we fit into the world. And I mentioned this earlier, that people who are self-aware also tend to be very self-compassionate. And so, one of our interview subjects, I remember, said, part of the challenge of the process of getting to see yourself clearly isn't just seeing yourself clearly, it's loving that person that you end up seeing. And so I see that as all part of the same thing. When we start to get into self-consciousness or rumination, that actually is qualitatively different from self-awareness. So I think that's a really important distinction. The second question is, sometimes people ask me this if I'm doing a speech or something. They raise their hand and they say, I'm 55 years old and I've been working on my self-awareness for 55 years and I'm so tired. When am I done? When can I be done with this? And so another one of our interview subjects was a middle school science teacher. And he gave a metaphor that I think is a very positive spin on the fact that we are never done. And he said the journey to self-awareness is a lot like exploring space, because no matter what we've learned, there's always more to discover. And I just, when I was doing that interview, I just got chills, at the first time kind of hearing that, because what it shows is no matter where we get, we don't have to fight and claw our way and turn it into a part-time job, but no matter where we are, there's always more to discover. And again, I started off this research project and this book writing process thinking I was super self-aware, but I've actually started to look at those even rude awakening moments, where somebody says, can I give you some feedback? And then, whoa, that's good. That's what our friend Alan Mullally from Ford calls a gem. A gem is something that you didn't know before, that you know now, that you now have the power to respond to. And it doesn't mean we have to change. It doesn't mean we have to, contort ourselves into a different person to make other people happy. But my theory is it's always better to know, and we're never done. And that's what makes it so exciting.
Awesome.
Great. And you just mentioned that as well. So how do I really know if I'm truly self-aware, or if maybe I'm thinking that I am self-aware? That this question comes from April.
Great question, April. So the first thing, I can give you something really practical. This is a free resource that we put out when I released Insight a couple of years ago. And maybe we can put it in the chat. It's insight-quiz.com. So that's www.insight-quiz.com. This is a very short subset. It's only 14 questions. It takes about 5 minutes of our larger, more validated self-awareness assessment. But what you do is you actually fill it out for yourself. You put in the email of someone who knows you well, they fill it out. And then when the system has both pairs, the pair of results, they generate a report for you of your high level of self-awareness, and then a couple of things you can do to improve. So that's just a very practical answer to your question. I think another way to look at it is to look at those 7 pillars that we talked about. How clear am I on my values, my passions, my aspirations, that ideal environment? And I think if you start to answer those questions, we're a little more honest with ourselves. I think if you ask, am I self-aware? Well, sure, I'm self-aware, because that's the thing I want to be. It's like, am I attractive or funny or good at parties? But then if we get to those specifics, I think there's a lot of insight to be gained there. So I hope that's helpful.
So in this regard, I want to very quickly put in a plug for a new course that's coming out, or just launched, right? Can you tell us a little bit about it? And I'm going to send you guys a link to it, okay, if you guys want to enroll in it. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about that course and how that's related to self-awareness.
Thank you, Raj. I am so excited about this course. We've actually been working on it for a little more than a year, and we weren't going to release it until the fall of 2020. But with the pandemic, we just thought we have to get this to people now. And it's called the Future Ready Leader. It's basically a course that's going to help you succeed in this unprecedented time of change. And we know that self-awareness is really the foundational skill for leadership effectiveness on a normal day. But what we also know is that in times of change and adaptation and disruption, having that clarity of who we are, how we're seen, what our assumptions are, is really what gives us a leg up. And so it's a course that's designed for leaders and aspiring leaders. But I also think even if you're not a formal leader in your organization, it's going to help you do things like better manage your stress on a day-to-day basis. It's going to help you make choices that are more aligned with what you really want. It's going to help you build environments around you where people tell the truth in a way that is productive and positive and helps your team perform. So just so excited about it. Really, really happy to bring it to the world. We actually did kind of a soft launch about a week ago, but given what was going on in the world, we're not going full tilt yet, but we did want to make this available to all of your viewers today.
If you need another beta tester.
Oh, awesome. I'll sign you up. And we're live, actually. So it's like a secret course that's live and ready for everyone, but we haven't done the big promotional push yet. So you guys are the few in the know.
Yeah. Serenity says, I'm a student, right? What she means, I think, is that she wants to take it too. Yeah. So I'll send you guys a link to it with some information. And I'm sure that a lot of you guys are very eager, given so many insights that have emerged even in the short conversation. I mean, taking a whole course with Tasha is going to be mind-blowing, I think. Awesome.
Thank you.
Just a good question from me and Maria. We're wondering if the books that you have there arranged by color, is that for a reason? Is that somehow connected with self-awareness?
I get a lot of questions about that. I'm going to just tell you like the super candid, honest truth about this. So in early March of 2020, I was grounded like everyone. I was supposed to be on my way to London from New York when I was sent home. And I sort of had this, I was like spiraling out of control about just not being able to get my arms around what was happening. And my colleague, Amy Cuddy on Instagram had posted something that she said, I just rearranged my, the books on my bookshelf by color, and I have never felt calmer in my entire life. And I thought, well, that's a kind of two birds with one stone situation, right? I can do something that makes me feel in control. I'm very much about like beauty and things looking nice, but then this was also going to be how I interacted with the world for the foreseeable future. And so I said it was my first pandemic project was this. And I don't know, it just makes me happy. Whenever I walk by, we have a big open loft, so you can kind of see my home office from most parts of it. I don't know, it just makes me happy.
I think it's fabulous.
Thank you. I love it.
Yeah. So I know that your book Insight is blue in color. Are some of those books that book, your book?
So yeah, the shelf, this shelf is all the different editions of Insight. And then there's a couple of Insight there, but then these are really all of my favorite authors. So it's very cool.
Yeah, I can see my book there. Yeah. All right. Any other questions, Elena or Matt?
Yeah, I think that actually the next thing we're going to see is people posting pictures of their bookcases arranged.
Oh my God. Yeah, I would love to see
that. Okay. So Chandru, hello Chandru. There's a question. So self-awareness often leads to overthinking. And how does one influence the Insight journey to have a positive experience outcome?
Oh man, I'm trying to think of a really good nugget. Here's one. Okay, so one way to make sure we have a positive outcome when we're talking to ourselves, this goes back to Mel's self-talk, is if I'm monitoring my inner monologue about anything, right? Trying to figure myself out, trying to figure out why something didn't work the way it wanted to, or an outcome that I'm not happy with. Ask yourself, would I be saying what I'm saying to myself to someone whom I like and respect? And I call that the friend test. And if we run through our inner monologue or our kind of process to gain insight through that, it sometimes, at least for me, it unmasks when I am getting in a ruminative thought pattern or when I am kind of not taking it in a productive direction. So that's just something little we can do. Obviously, it's not the full process, but hopefully that's a practical one.
I like that. Yeah. Would I say that to a friend or somebody that I truly deeply care about, right? Yeah.
Tasha, and when you mentioned that you could see that that leader was going to be a CEO, how could you tell that? How did you know? How did you feel that?
You know, I wish I could tell you and put it into words. I think so much of, what we all do is part science. For me, it's a large part science, but then it's also the intuition and experience that you build over time. And by no means am I perfect and I can't see the future, but what I think we learn is, what are the best leaders, like for me, what are the best leaders I've ever come across? And does this person remind me of them? Knowing that every leader is different and kind of has their own style, and there's not one right way of being a leader. But I think for me, like outside of my conscious awareness, that's probably what's happening.
Awesome. So before Elle asks the next question, I have a completely unrelated question, Tasha, because sometime back you were talking about the 7 pillars of self-awareness and values. We already talked about it, but you also mentioned passions. So can you tell us one of your 3 passions? And if it's something like singing or things that can be demonstrated, can I put you on the spot and ask you to do that? And that can change what your passion is.
So that answer is no. But I will tell you, I'm lucky that, I think my number one passion is what I talked about business being the greatest tool for personal growth. And the reason I'm like that is I'm a 3rd generation entrepreneur. My mom was a single mom. She started a company. I followed her around. I got to see what it was like to, for her to create prosperity for herself and the people who worked for her. So that's kind of like the DNA of who I am. 2 other passions. One is actually theater and singing. I did some professional theater work. I was actually a theater major in college. It was kind of almost the entirety of who I was, but in a self-awareness kind of vein, I realized that I was pretty good. Like I was a pretty good actor. I was a pretty good director, but there were people out there who were spectacular, who were still probably not going to succeed in the way they wanted to. And so that was when I decided psychology and theater were my 2 majors. That was when I decided to go to psychology. And then the 3rd passion I have is animals. I love all animals, but dogs, rescuing animals. Our little 6-pound poodle that I told you about earlier, her name is Fred. She came from a puppy mill, which are, in the US, large commercial breeding facilities that are completely legal. It's where most puppies and pet stores come from. So I always tell people, make sure you know where your puppies are coming from. They just lead horrible lives, but rescuing Fred, and they don't even know what grass is. They've never been outside. They've never had vet care. They've never had human contact. And so being able to kind of show her the world and, we're each other's emotional support animal. That's what I always say, has just been very cool.
Can we see Fred?
Let's see. Hi, Fred. She knows we're talking about her. She's in a very, very quiet place. Can you see her in her bed right there?
Yeah.
She's out cold. I don't know why, but in my mind's eye, I imagine her to be white, and she's dark gray. It looks like, right?
Yeah. She's getting gray. She was on the adoption form. The color was listed as cafe au lait. Oh. Which I thought sounded very fancy. But
yeah. Okay. So Tushar has a question about Elena looking like the embodiment of happiness.
Can we know your secret?
Well, I think doing what you want, like when you really are surrounded with people that you like right now, for example, or when I teach, for example, I have students, my mood just changes immediately. Like you can see me before my class and me during the class and after the class. That's a big change. So when I teach my classes, I'm all there, I'm involved, like I'm in the state of flow, I could say. And so I forget about everything and I'm there, and then this exchange of energy is amazing for me. I love the exchange of energy. It's important for me. And now it makes it a bit harder because it's online. But still, it's for me, that's the environment in which I am. So that automatically changes me and I forget about everything else. I'm just there and I'm happy.
Wonderful.
Like right now, for example, I'm just here with you. I don't know. I don't notice anything around. I'm just here and this makes me happy. The conversation that we're having, topics we're discussing, it's so stimulating, enriching. And so that makes me happy.
Wonderful. So I know, Elena, that you are also somebody who's had experience with theater.
Yes.
Right? And Mel, I seem to also remember that you have some experience with theater, right? Or you love giving talks. You love being
talks. I love giving. Yeah.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do, guys. We only have a minute left or something. So let's pick a song, and we're all going to sing. And maybe I'll just do drums or whatever in the background. Okay. So what song shall we pick? How about what is that? Here are a few of my favorite things. How does the song go? These are a few of my favorite things
From
Sound of Music.
I'm having an anxiety attack right now.
What?
I said I'm having an anxiety attack right now.
That's my thing.
How does it go? Raindrops on roses.
This is your idea, so you gotta be our leader.
Right? Is that the song?
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one.
Yeah,
Okay, ready? So pull up the lyrics, guys. Okay, Tasha,
Yeah.
you're okay with this?
Yeah. Let me do it. Hang on.
Okay. These are a few of my favorite things. All right, and we are going to go to lyrics. And Mel, you want to pick the pitch?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Bum, 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 bum.
Raindrops on roses and tears on trees. I didn't look at dog bells and sleigh bells and something.
No, you gotta have your
Why
lyrics.
don't you skip to the second verse?
Oh. My
Maybe
mind
we can start from the chorus right away.
You know, this is not working because I think there is a little bit of time lag. Are you guys also sensing that?
A little bit. We have to work on this. We'll have some intensive rehearsals on Zoom.
we need to
Ultimately, our public.
everyone in the chat could score us on a 1 to 10 for courage, creativity, and skill. And,
Right. Yeah. All right. Hey, listen, thank you so much, guys. It was so awesome. It's really pepped up my Saturday morning. You know, it's exactly what I wanted it to be, a happy hour for me. And I'm going to continue to drink this until this is over. And then I'm going to fill it up with beer and then some lemonade and make a shandy for myself. It's hot here in Austin. And I hope that you guys have a great time too, the rest of the Saturday. Thank you so much, Tasha.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank
It's really a
you.
pleasure. Nice to meet you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Mel and Alina.
Bye.